Hi everyone, welcome back into the studio. Sorry for my voice. I kind of lost my voice. I got one of these summer colds this last week and I've been trying to kick it all week long, and so now my voice is a little bit weak, so I apologize for that. But we'll get through this. I just got to get painting again. It's just something I just got to do. So I promised you that we're going to paint this German Shepherd, and I've done German Shepherds and stuff before. They're such a fun breed to paint. There's a lot of fun breeds. I love Labradors and German Shepherds, and I promised my grandkids I'm going to paint all their dogs for them and stuff. But so we're going to see a lot of them because they have 4 dogs. But I'm going to do this German Shepherd. This is the one I posted up there. There it is up on the monitor. That's what I like to use. Now, how I'm going to approach this, I'm going to start out here today and tell you everything I use into the process. What I recommend for you, especially because I have a lot of new beginners on the channel. So I want to show you, some things that you can do to make this entire art journey a little bit easier. Because that's our goal. Our goal is to get nice paintings and then learn along the way. I have been painting since I was 16. Now I'm 66, so I've been painting a very long time. And I have changed the way I do things over the years, and I like to present those different ways to you. So I'm going to present a slightly different way this time than what we did with like Brutus, the Labrador, and some of the others that you see on the channel. So the first thing that I do is I kind of decide the size. And this one is about, you can put it on a 22 by 28. I went 28 by, and then actually added another inch to it to 23. But you could put them on that very easy. And those of you that are members of the channel that pay the subscription and stuff, that I'll put a PDF pattern for it, so this and everything that you can have. But what I do is I have a very large format printer too that I print out. You could take a photo like this over to, and I tape it together. You can see that. You can take it over to your local office supply store, print it out on a 17 by 11 and join it together so you have this to look at. And what I do is I first look at it just to make sure that's going to be a good size. Is it going to be a size that I like, that's going to hang nice, especially if I'm doing a commissioned portrait? Is it going to hang nice? Is it going to sit in a a person's living room very nice? And so I decide on a lot of things, and I look at it first at the black and white, looking at it for the contrast and stuff like that. So I decide that. And then I go ahead and I decide if I'm going to do a stretch canvas or if I'm going to do like I did here, which is the this right here is called a cradle board. Okay. Now for years I've done just the panel all by itself, a wood panel. I've told you about that. And in this last year, I've done it on a couple of big Westerns, the cradle board. And I love the cradle board because it gives a lot of support. It keeps it absolutely flat. You can see on the size here. And let me drop this down just so you can see some of this. Okay, so what I have, or you might be able to see some of this, you can see this board that's right here, and I just use a clamping system on it. My board sets down inside of this, and it's pinned up at the top and bottom. Let me just drop this down just a little bit. It's pinned up here at the top and the bottom, where you can see right here and here. Let's slide this over just a bit. And so you can see that. And what I do is, so this board just clamps and moves, and I can take this board out if I want. And it's just pinned in the hole. But let me turn this around so you can see what the cradle board is. So I take the wood panel that I really enjoy, and I get these wood panels. I buy them in 4x8 sheets, and then I run them through out in my wood shop. But you can buy them in various sizes and stuff at your local home supply store. We have out here in the Midwest a very large one that's everywhere called Menards, and I get this 1/4 inch sheet, and it's all sanded and it's beautiful, and it's only about $30 for a sheet of it. It's really inexpensive. And then I surround it here with 3/4 inch board that is glued and clamped and held in place overnight, and then it holds this thing absolutely flat. And then what I do is I give this a couple coats of the canvas prep medium. Here I just gave 1 coat and sanded it with 180 grit sandpaper because I'm going to be doing so much to this painting. Let's go back up again here. doing so much. So you can see this holds it in really well, just pinching it down between those two boards. It's just such a great way to do that. And this board here, like I said, I give it a coat and sand it 1 or 2 coats until you get a nice feel to the surface. And I use the canvas prep because I want it to be slightly absorbent, okay? So how do you go about getting your pattern like this, okay? There's a bunch of different ways. The way, if you're, and I've showed you, in the last Western, I showed you how to use the grid system. And that's one of my favorite systems, is the grid system. But when I need to have something absolutely accurate, and especially like if I'm doing a portrait, I go back to the old method, one that I've been using for over 20 years. And that's where I take I'll show you here. I make a plastic pattern of it, okay? So this is what I did on him. And excuse me while I untape. I wasn't too smart about putting this together with the tape right there. But what I do is I make a plastic pattern of it. Now, this plastic you can get, I buy it right up on Blick, and you can get it in giant rolls, small rolls. But it's a clear plastic. I'll put links for everything I do down in the video description, okay? So you'll be able to go over there and find that. But I use this, and this is the most important part. This is called the zebra pen. We sell it we get it from Japan. It is a pen that is absolutely, so you make a mark on it, it is absolutely instantaneously permanent the second you take that off. And I love to draw with this onto the plastics. And so it has a wide edge and it has a small edge on it. And so I lay this plastic over my over the large pattern of it here, and I take off the major lines. That's how I like to do it. But there's other ways to do it as well, and I've showed you that in other videos. One is to run it. There's programs you can get on your phone. You can get them on it comes right on your computer. If you have Windows 11 and stuff, it's called Sketch. And you can just put in a photo and say, I want a line drawing of it, and it'll generate a line drawing. I don't always find that gives me enough information for myself as an artist. And so I run through a process of Photoshop where you take the color photo and then you run it down. And so I just printed off, so I didn't have to print off the whole thing, but I just printed off his head so you can see what his head looks like when you get done with that. The whole process takes just about 2 minutes, and it's easy to do. I'll put a link to the video that shows you right on YouTube exactly the process for going through that. And those of you that are membership, I'll put this particular photo of the entire painting in the membership for you so you can see what the whole thing was. And you could just lay a piece of plastic right over that and take off all the important lines. Why I use this, and I'm going to start out with this, and I'm going to show you this, is because when we start this painting, I'm going to do what's called a Bistre technique on it. This is one that I use. You don't see me use it very much on the other animals, like on Buster and all those other labs and everything that I've painted with you before. I'm going to show you a different technique. And guys, that's what I do, okay? I am a teacher more than an artist, and I have been a teacher for 50 years, and I love being a teacher. I love exploring new ways of doing things and presenting it to you, okay? I don't just paint one way. I paint all different kinds of ways. And, and I like to educate you. Then you take all of that, you put it up here in your little library, and then you pull it out, and then you become the artist that you want to be. And that's what you can do. So I make the plastic of it. You could use this, and you could easily put this down and take a line drawing of this off of this. Now, what is important about this plastic? If you're a beginner, you should use this plastic, because as we get painting here, things are going to get distorted. You're going to grow some areas and shrink some areas. And you can always lay this plastic back over the design here and see exactly where I might be off. Did I make his eye too big? Did I lower it down a little bit like that? Something like that, okay? And so you can use that plastic as a reference. And because there's 3 parts to a painting that I always say. There is the design, the drawing, and we all need to learn how to draw. But if you're a beginner, you need to make sure that you're going to get it accurate. And learning to draw and learning to paint at the same time is sometimes really difficult. So as a teacher over the years, successfully, what I've done is I've broken it into 3 parts: the drawing, the technique, and the color. Those are 3 areas of study that you need to do. How to make those colors, because you're lost if you don't know how to make the colors. And then the technique. Are you going to do a layering technique, halftone technique, some type of blending technique? What kind of technique are you going to use on it? And then the drawing, natural drawing. But the plastic eliminates that for the first part while you start to paint. And then with time, you work on all of these skills. You work on them all, okay? So how do you get the plastic to here? That's always another thing. And it's a non-smearing design. This doesn't. Well, for years, this came about, I started using it back almost 40 years ago when it came out. This is called artist transfer paper. And you can get it right on Blick and stuff. You can buy it on Amazon as well. It's a transfer paper. It is not a carbon paper. It has no film that gets on your hands or anything like that. And you put that down over your design, and I just tape it right into my design. You put the plastic on, and then you trace over your lines. And if it is dark, now that comes light and dark, what I usually do is I put a piece of tracing paper over it as well, like this, and so I can see through it, and then I put my plastic pattern up on, and I transfer it off. And I tape it all into position, and then you get those lines on, right? And that's the way that I recommend for all beginners. Even if you're, I've been painting and I've done commissioned portraits and animals and all kinds of stuff over the years. And let me tell you, for me as well, if I'm working on one that, is really, really important, someone that's, an animal, like I had a guy down in Colorado, and he wanted me to paint all these hunting dogs for him and stuff that he had had over the years, and especially he's going to put them in his den, all his dogs. Man, I wanted those to be absolutely perfect. So I don't always trust my drawing skills. I go right into I just capture that. And I'm going to put a link, guys, to another video that's down in the video description. It is one of the greatest portrait painters that I learned so much over all the years of human portrait painting, John Howard Sanden. You've heard me reference him and everything. On YouTube, there's a video on there, a retrospect of him. And I believe it's like 10, 15 minutes long. It is magnificent, and you need to watch that. But he says something in there that's very important. Why I'm going to show you the Bistre technique today is he says that it's easy to capture an image. We could take a tracing like this and capture the image, right? But you need to capture the character. And so when I was looking at these photos and stuff of all these beautiful dogs and everything, and I needed to capture it, I wanted to capture the character of those animals. And that is very important. And there's certain lines in the face, in the portrait face, certain lines, certain angles in which you put there, certain light and dark values that give character to that portrait, that subject. And that's one of the things that I like to make sure I capture. And that's what I'm going to do with you first. We're going to spread this technique out a little bit, and I'm going to show you a little bit more involved. And hopefully for you beginners, this will give you some more confidence. The Bistre technique is a technique that comes all the way back from the 18th century, and it was done by major Victorian artists and stuff. And they would actually paint the umbers. Basically, Bistre is an umber painting of it first. And it come basically from the Dutch. They did what's called a penumbra technique, the 7-layer Dutch technique that I did for years. I've traveled around the world, many different countries, teaching the penumbra umbra technique, or what's called the Flemish technique. It's also called the Flemish technique. 7 layers of the Flemish technique. And that was great. But then, certain Victorian artists, portrait artists, went to a Bistre technique, and they would use the Umbers and stuff to put something underneath there. And the Umber technique on this shepherd is going to work really, really well, okay? So that's how I get the image on there. I like to look at him up on my big monitor here. And then I also, for the ease of filming with you, I usually just look at the monitor. But for the ease of filming, I'm also going to put up a picture and stuff on here so you can look at the colors. And I try to, you know, I adjust the photo, and if I had to print this out 3 times, lighting and dark, depends on which printer you print it out on, till I got the colors in him that I really like. And I can see differences in the colors, and this is what, you know, I like to do. So I see, you know, light's coming this way, and he's got a nice golden glow here, and you see him go more gray here, more on this side here. And I get a good value control in through there. I can see it very clearly on that monitor. The monitor, the camera doesn't film the monitor really well, but that's why I love a monitor. I can bring it up and I can adjust the colors, and I want this photo to match as close as possible to that monitor that's up there. The monitor's just a little brighter than what this is, and that's why I like the monitor, okay? So I'll have this so during the filming of it, we can look at that, all right? And then I'm also going to start out the painting, though, with this one here, because this is what I want to capture first, the character of the dog. And so when I look at where my dark values are, these are the important lines, especially the curvature of the eye, the curvature of the line and stuff above the eye. Because if you drop it down too straight, he'll get really angry. If you raise it up too high, he gets too excited. That's how you change basically the expression of any type of portrait, is that upper eyelid, that eye line, really adjust that. And so I use this, and we're gonna start out with that, and we're going to have a lot of fun. I'm gonna teach you guys a lot of things. So I know, and plan on me doing a lot of talking, because I love to teach this, and I want everyone to be successful with it, okay? So if you want to just go watch somebody paint a portrait really fast, turn off the volume and put me on a fast, high speed, okay? Because I'm going to teach you everything I know about, you know, getting this image, getting the character of this dog, okay? With my scratchy voice as much as possible. So now, I have that down. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is, sometimes you see me do it, sometimes I don't do it. I am going to tone down this board. And so on my colors that I have out here, I've added, this is the Dave's favorite palette. The links and stuff and colors and everything are in the video description. But I'm adding out this really beautiful Australian sienna. This is raw sienna. It's a beautiful Australian sienna. And if you notice, it's really thick. And that's because I've added a little, you've seen me do this before. I've added in just a little bit of the acrylic thickener to it. And I like the raw sienna, since it's going to be a main painting color, a large painting color on him. I like it to be a little bit thicker. I'll explain more about that later on. The umber that I'm going to use here, burnt umber. So I've added to this colors, I've added a raw sienna, burnt umber, and this is medium beige. Burnt umber, I put it out just a little bit thinner. I like it to be a little thinner. So add some water to it, or a little bit of extender to it to thin it down a little bit, and it'll make the Bistre technique quite a bit easier. But I'm going to start out first. I'm going to take a sponge here, and I'm just going to take a bit of my medium beige out here on this with just a sponge, and I'm going to wipe this over my board here, over the whole thing. Get this nice and wet and move it a nice casual. And I don't like it to be real super even. And so I like it to have some variations and stuff to it. I want it a little heavier right down in here into his body and stuff. And then I'm going to want it a little bit lighter up there. And how do you get lighter? Just turn the sponge over and take it off of those areas. You could also wipe it down with a paper towel, or wipe your sponge like this and take some of it off and start pulling through those areas here. And you don't have to worry about this drying, because if the Heritage paint does this really, really easy. And as long as you just keep manipulating it through, you're going to get some you can even it out really easy. So I want a little lighter here. I'll make it a little heavier in his body. This will give him a little bit of tone in here to begin with, and I'll just kind of smoosh it around. You know, all this becomes opaque. You know, it doesn't make too much a difference, but it makes it easier for me. I start to see him. And that's the whole process I like to do. I put it on, I know I'm going to cover a lot of this up, but I'm putting on a process that's helping me start to find this subject, okay? So then I'll rinse that out a little bit. We'll probably use that sponge again. And that's just a big tile setter sponge. You see me, I varnish with those. I do all kinds of stuff with those. I have links and stuff to them in our store and stuff I use. You go to the tile department of your home store, you get it for a couple bucks. I cut it into 4 corners, and it's called a tile setter sponge. Works really well, holds a lot of water, so you can do a lot of fun techniques with it and stuff. So, and since I use just the water, and since this is 100 degrees outside today, that's going to dry pretty quickly. And I think we can get going on this thing. I'm going to move this over just a touch. And I'm going to, this tape might have a problem sticking to that with that moisture on there, but we'll give it a try here first. And I like to put, you know, like when I'm doing something like this, yeah, it's going to have a little bit of a problem there for a bit as it dries. What I like to do is I like to set at almost the same eye level as what I'm going to be painting here. Let's just move that over a little bit here. And so I like to set it at the same eye level, so I just look right across. And with the Bistre technique, what we're going to do is we're going to basically use some of the darks in there. Yeah, see, I knew that. It's got to dry up just a little bit more. But with that Bistre technique, we're going to use this to bring out those important essential lines and get those correct first. It's much easier to correct them and get them correct now, and then let those lines translate through the paint layers than it is to try to fuss with this when we start getting a whole bunch of colors everywhere on our painting, okay? So it's a much better way to do it. I think I'll just put a longer piece and go up to a dry area here. So we'll move over about the same height here. We'll just hang that down there like that. Okay, so we're looking at that. Let's see, that's about good. We could come down just a bit. All right, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to just use a smaller brush, and I'm going to put in some of those areas. Now, basically in the technique, I like Sanden's technique, who followed John Singer Sargent. And Sargent's one of his rules, his principles of alla prima painting, portrait painting, was use as large a brush as possible for any color passage that you're painting. That's the one rule that you follow. So you don't normally go to real small brushes. But in the Bistre technique, I'm going to use a small one starting out because Sargent didn't paint the Bistre technique. So here I am. I'm using techniques from all different kinds of artists to find the way I like to do it, right? But the Bistre technique, we're going to use this to kind of set the tones. And the 2 lines, I'm going to take some burnt sienna. This is a little number 2 fusion filbert, little soft, little one here. And the 2 lines that are some of the most important on our painting here are going to be the curvature of the eye, right up above the eye here. So I'm going to get that curvature exactly correct on that eye. And I'm going to pull it as slow as I can. If you need to, and I'm a little bit shaky because I'm coming off of being ill for 5 days. If you're a little bit shaky, use a maul, all different kinds. It's called a maul stick. Use it to support your hand and put that in there, okay? And I don't want to go absolutely that far down. We're going to do that, put in the shadow of his eye. But so I just take my brush with a little bit of water and take off what I don't need and bring that back up again, so and take it off. So we're going to paint with acrylic and water here for a little bit. Nice, important one. Now, what you see about this one is it clips the top of the eye over to this side. But what is very important is this dark line, which is making his ocular socket here, is going to come a little bit to the outside there. just a little bit. It actually forms a little bit of a triangle. So we're going to want to make sure that we preserve that. And then again, I'll rinse my brush slightly and we'll bring back out the roundness of his eye right there. Okay. Now, I'm probably going to make those a little darker too in the beginning. I mean, in just a little bit. So this is the technique I love to do because it helps me slowly see the subject, you know. But I paint all different kinds. Sometimes when I paint, you know, a quick animal, I just do it real quick. But if you're really capturing somebody who spent, you know, 10, 14 years with this subject and they know them, you want to capture their character. So I'm going to put that down. I'm going to tap that down a little wider right here. Tap my brush in and try to start to grab some of that line that you see there, right? And there's a small little triangle shape up over here. We'll put that in and get that in right there. And there's just a tiny little line of it that is, you know, rounding out the actual eye. And so I'll just soften that line. So you see it just barely with this a little bit of water. See, you can see these are the important lines of the eye. Thin, smaller one here up onto this side, coming down and around. Sometimes I tap it a little bit instead of just putting on a line. I make sure I have no ridges of paint. In case I need to go over this later, you have no ridges of paint here. So you're just putting on the darkness of it. Okay, so I grabbed those two right there. We see we have some of this now. You see all of this, what we call granulated area. You have granulated areas all over everything here. So in the Bistre technique, you don't use as much water. You go with the paint a little bit drier. So I'll dry this out on my palette here a bit. And I'm just going to pull down like this. And you see, you start to get some granulation to it. I'll start to add that into that area. A nice one right here. Very important one here because this sets his interest of his eye. Darker right there. It goes up, leaving a little bit of that lid, the upper lid, right in there. And that's going to set his importance of his eye there. Now, sometimes I'll drag my finger back through to lighten some of that. This is all going to be covered up later on. But what you're doing, what is this? You know, some people want to just paint fast and just do things. Okay, you can paint fast and do things. But if you're you know, capturing the character of somebody, you want to slowly get into that subject. Does that make sense? Slowly find that subject and pick that subject off of this surface. And so this is a technique that allows you, each time I manipulate this, I'm learning more and more about my subject. That's the important part of it, right? So we'll put this is an important line as well. This line that's right here, it sets the interest of the eye. And so we'll put that in. We'll come up to the top here just a bit. It's going to set the interest that that dog is going to have. So we're a little careful, but it's not as dark. The darkest, and I'll be looking for some of the darkest area here pretty quick. The darkest, really dark, is right down in here. So sometimes now I'll come with a second coat to darken some areas a little bit more. Before I make the color darker, I'll add a second coat to darken some of the areas. So let's thin this out. Just drag it on the palette here. Let's just put in some thin areas that we see here. There's a darker area, so we'll grab some more paint right over here. A little bit darker. Now watch. The thing is about looking at your subject and having it there, having that one here, having I can put the color photo of this up at the same time, is that the nice thing about it, the hair of the dog, that's telling you which direction to make that mark. So I'm looking at the hair that's right here, not only the color, but the direction of the mark here. And this shortens and eclipses eye just a bit right there. And then I'm going to drag this out a bit here. Just push that out, drag that out. Darken it right up here a bit. We'll do all of this just a little bit more, but that's what I slowly like to do. And to me, guys, this is the fun part of painting, right? This is the fun part of painting. We finding our subject and just sitting down and slowly first. And I so enjoy the Bistre part of the technique. Yeah, it adds a couple hours to your painting, but it is just so wonderful to do. So, and I use just water. That's all I need if I need to thin out an area. Like if I want to come up here, and this particular part of the dog portrait is called the step. Okay, so in a dog, this part of the dog right here is called the step. And so, and it is a very important transitional plane for that dog. You don't just run your brush down there. And it's a transitional plane because you're going to look at the plane coming out this way and the plane coming down. And it's such an important area that we do name it. We do give this a very important thing called the step. So the step, right where the step is into that area, it is a vertical stroke down, and then it is an angled 45-degree angle mark coming back up the other way here, like this. So, and I can see a little bit of color right here, so I'll just go ahead and put a little bit in there for right now. I don't need too much into that, but just a little bit. Right here, just like the shepherd we have out at the farm, he has a nice little bump in his nose right there, and which I got to paint him too. He was my son's dog, Piter, and he is such a magnificent shepherd. I'm going to pull this out at a slight angle here. We're going to work all of this several times, but I start to find his character. That's what I'm looking for, right? And I'm looking at the values. Where do you see the darks? There's going to be a nice dark right up here, transitional part of his ear, right in there. We'll see that. And I might as well go ahead and just touch in the pupil of the eye here. Round it up as much as possible. We'll leave that iris just really clear here, there, like that, okay? And so I'll slowly come down other really dark areas. I'll go ahead and put them in now. It doesn't, it doesn't hurt. With this type of technique, this is what I do. So I'll make sure I get some of his nostril here set in, down in here. In a human, this is called the philtrum in this area here. When you're doing a human portrait, we'll put a little bit of shadow in there, a little bit to help the roundness right here of that, right there, and here. And so before I even start, like at the ones I've done, before I even start to block in, which I've done with you before on other techniques, this is just a great way to take a few minutes and start to set his character. Now, when you come, right down into this particular area, right in here, his upper lips and stuff, which is called this particular area with his upper lip, and believe it or not, it's called the flew, F-L-E-W, okay? It's the upper lip part here. And so this one that's over here is a little bit darker and granulated slightly here. And we need to get these areas correct here. And I need to get the strokes, the marks correct here. And it's going to be really modeled up. I'm going to dry my paint here just a bit. So it's darker over here. It is going to be lighter over here and more slightly angled, almost vertical, slightly angled. This is going to be a very important, because this is like in this area when you're setting the flew, the upper lip and the lower lip right down in through here. This is like us getting the mouth on a human portrait correct, the smile. Does that make sense? So if you want, and it's really important to the character. So underneath the tongue here, there'll be some dark that's right here, pulling down slightly here, like that. And you can already see if I just take let me thin this out, because this tongue is so important. There's a little shadow right here on the shadow side. Let me just put a little bit in here, just so you see that modeled up. And it is the flew and the lower lip right up and through here that is going to set the smile and major lines for character in a dog, okay? He's going to have a tooth right up in there, but we can get this a little darker right in there, right? Up here, as the upper lip is overriding the lower lip here, we're going to have some darks right down here, pulling down, and right down through here. Just a little bit. Let me dry the paint out so I don't have much paint, and I just scumble. This is called, you know, in the Dutch technique, they call this a scumbling, but they do it with light values. But I do it with dark values and call it scumbling as well. Back up into here, this is an important line, a very important line right here. Back on the upper lip, this line right here sets the angle at which that smile is going to be. So you can see that line right there. That's an important one. So you look for that one. You look for those lines. Try to get those lines, what you're seeing. And this photo just breaks those lines down very simplistically so we can look at those lines. It's a great way to do it. You could use a bigger brush here too for some of this bigger areas. Let's get that. So we get this philtrum area here down into the flue here. And I'm going to widen his nose. A little dry paint right here. You've got to square off his nose right here, but it will round slightly right here. Okay. We have this division right up here of his nostril. So we'll get that shadow line in there. These will soften out quite a bit right there. But that other little bit of dark, that line is too harsh, too straight. Break it up just a bit there. Okay. And so throughout the rest of it through here, you could use a large brush and put in a few little marks if you want to, you know, that are going to help set up his face. Like this big ocular bone here that is setting the socket of his eyes and stuff. I might go to a bigger brush here in just a minute and put some of that in. Matter of fact, let's just do that. I'm going to go to like a number 8 fusion flat. We'll set some larger areas in here. Dry this paint out a bit, a little bit thin. Let's pull some of this in so you can see just a bit of that. Will help set his, you know, it's easier to see for some of you beginners. You can see some of that stuff that's there. And this will help you understand the direction of some of the marks that we're going to make later on here. That is a little bit too angular there. It comes up first. So, and see, I can see that. And I'm running through some of these processes with a color that's helping me find the portrait, but it's also easy to change. That's the big part of it. It's easy to change. So we'll just use some of this here. And as I get out, I don't have to be as careful. My lines can become a little bit more casual here. I still want to kind of give them their brush techniques and stuff like that. But I'll be looking at the widths of some of the shadow, wider down here up to there. A little bit of angular look here, right up there. Doesn't have to be quite as perfect. There's going to be a lot of movement here, which there is on the back of the ear. Right, so back here, we'll put some of that in. And a little bit heavier right in through here, and then just lighten the pressure a little bit, just little touches of it right back up there, a little heavier at the top here. There, that might be too heavy, but we can model some of that down. So you could do, you know, there's a technique of painting everything in gray, which is part of the Flemish technique. They call it the dead layer, but we call it grisaille painting. And you know, in portraits, you have what are called verdaccio, painting it in green. You have, you know, other types of techniques here. But I love to do, I found, especially if I'm painting a warm subject like this or dog, I love to use this type of thing of the umbers. And it's a variation. It's not exactly what Bouguereau and all of the others did, but, you know, it works for me for portraits and stuff. And I like that. So I'm just doing some thin, a little bit dry marks. It just tells me a little bit about the direction of some of the stuff going on. So this is almost a vertical downstroke in this area. So I'll start putting a little bit of that into that area. It has a couple of angles this way. So I just cross on top of that a little bit that way. Could be a little bit heavier right there. Like that. That helps close off that ocular area there. And so you can start looking and see there's another very important one I'm missing right here, which closes off the top of this cheekbone in that ocular area there. And that's kind of important before it transitions down through this area here and the whole strokes of the fur and stuff that we'll put in. Now, and this is what's important about it, see? If you're looking at a pattern line, you see a line, you draw a pattern, we put a pattern line out here, we see a line. But when you're looking at it here, you see the darkness belongs in here. And out here, you see it almost fading away into the background. So what you don't want to do is go in there with a dark color and bring this out. Let me do that first and show you. You will rotate this part of his face too far forward if you get this color too dark. See, it puts too much emphasis on that side over there. He doesn't have a receding side. So we need to get rid of that. And I'll just do it this way. And so all of a sudden that side of his face starts to recede. But it does pick up dark right up here by his ear. And we'll take care of that into the final painting. But we want to make sure that that's softer there. And we want to make sure that this is a little darker, like right up in here. And that causes his nose to advance forward and this part of it to recede. And if it doesn't, if you say you got too much color into it, even though that is dry, with the Heritage paint, you just take a little water in your brush and you take it back off, right? So I can take that back off, lighten that area here. Just, I want a little bit there by that eye socket there. But I can manipulate it and move it around a bit. And that works pretty well in that area. Let's get just a little bit more. I put out all this burnt umber. We'll use it in the painting here, but it doesn't take too much for the Bistre technique here, or the version of the Bistre technique. This is my slightly different version of it. I still call it that, but it's slightly different. You'll see in other portraits, those of you that followed me in other portraits, and I use the full Bistre technique a little bit differently, and I create a really beautiful color with a green and a beige, and and I'll paint the Bistre technique that way. Variation. I like to do different things, but when I first saw this line of him, I knew this is what I wanted to do with him, because this would help me see him first, and that's the ticket. What technique are you going to use to pick him off of this? That's a little too dark right up there. What kind of technique are you going to use to pick him off of this this board here, so you can start seeing your subject here? So we'll start this. It doesn't take very long, 20 minutes. So you start putting this out here, and we'll put a little heavier right there. All of this will change up a bit as we get going, but it gives you kind of an idea. And this part of the ear really kind of disappears over there a bit. Okay, so we'll just model that just a bit right in there. Now, what I'm going to do is start bringing in some more emphasis here into his eye. So I'm going to go back to my smaller brush to make burnt umber darker, cooler, which is what happened. Right now it's a warm. To make it darker and cooler, you can add a touch of blue, a touch, Dave, that's a little too much, and even a touch of red violet. And that'll make, you can see it is a darker, cooler color. I'll start right where I see the darkest parts. Like there's going to be a dark mark inside the upper eyelid right in here that's a little bit darker, and I'll put that in. I see the darker mark right here, which is really important to the expression, the excitement of his face here, and a touch a tap and a touch right down in through there. And all of a sudden you see that eye start to pop off just a little bit more. So values are so important. This line could come over just a bit. Values are so important. Let's bring this darkness up in here a bit. Make sure you get that curvature in there. That's so very important to capturing him. Let's darken inside the nostrils. And you can do this at any time. I like to give till I have, how long, I'm going to put some down the philtrum here. How long do you do this? Until you get a really good impression of what your dog is going to look like. That's what you're doing. You feel that you've captured his character a little bit, not all of it, but you're going to capture some of his character. Let's drop some of that into here, a little darker. That's just a beautiful, dark, rich color that helps so much in the painting here. Little dark mark maybe right in here. Just a bit. That's good. This comes down just a little straighter right there. And I need that mark. I need this. I've encroached on the eye a little too much right here. So I'm going to take a little water and take that back out. There. How much that eye stays open is really important. He has a mark, but it's not quite that dark right here of his third eyelid is actually what you're seeing right there, right? So let's put a few more areas just for our own bit in here of some of these darks that we'll see. A little bit up in here. All of this will paint out and change. Do I do this each time? No. But on really important commissions and stuff, or someone that, you're working on somebody. Let me tell you, my dogs over all the years, all my dogs that I've had, I love them. They're part of my family. And I mean, they are my family. And my dogs are important. And when I paint them, when I've painted them before and done studies of them, I try as my best to capture their character. Just like Sanden said. If you have an opportunity, guys, to go watch his video, John Howard Sanden, a retrospective, listen to him and the professionalism that he brings to what all of us love to do. He brings a professionalism to it that is absolutely amazing. And I just sat and listened to him for hours. And he was such a nice man. And I wrote him several questions, and he always responded and stuff. And just such a great man. Teacher. And so I'll do that. I'm going to get this line a little more correct right there on that nostril. Let's darken that pupil just a touch here. It's probably fine, but maybe just a touch for right now. But I see that line quite a bit better. And it'll go, some of this will go over, a little bit further into them. I have some softer marks and stuff that I can put in. I could do the Bistre technique throughout his whole body here. But one of the reasons why I'm not, let me just soften this line. One of the reasons why I'm not is because I want to get his face, and his face is going to set what's happening in the rest of the painting here. So this is actually right here, this line, this is part of his lip here. This is the actual upper flue right here. And so I'll just bring that out just a little bit more. So it's really good because I'm seeing right now where I had just a little bit of error in the line. And you can see it. Hopefully you see it. I'm a little more square and the photo's a little more round. And I think right in there, I'll just start to round that just a little bit more. That round is really important. That's the expression on him. And we're going to have a slightly light edge right against the edge at the bottom of the flue here. So we'll bring that down in there like that just a bit. Needs to round just a touch more. Sometimes, if I know I'm close, I'll go ahead and move. And I make a little mental note that I need to fix that area. But it's dangerous because you usually, if you're like me, you have an opportunity to forget. So, and I don't want to do that, especially if you're working on a really important one. So we'll grab those marks. And that looks pretty good into him right like that. So you can capture some of that. And so I could take, but if I wanted to, see, I could take some of this and just, it's fun. You use a little bit of paint here. You come around the outside and you can just do, with the bigger brush here, just do a little quick work, like right in through here. You're going to have some, some of the big fur and stuff like that. So you can use the paper towel with this and set some of the movement and look of what it is. Now, there's this color and a shadow that's going to come in here that I'm going to want to do here. And see, I just use that in the paper towel, and I can give the look of fur really easy. And just to get the, some of the feel of it here. And doesn't need to be perfect in any manner of means, because we have, a lot. The face is where I really concentrate on it. And so let's get rid of that. That's a light area a little bit, but we need just a touch here. And I'm just watching my big one up there. So I'll just put that shadow. This is 2 parts. The heavier is right in here, right in there. Kind of follow the direction that you have in the fur. Look for the fur. That's that's the line that you're going to follow. And sometimes I'll just do a real, this is really how I like to draw. So when I'm working without transferring a pattern and stuff, and I'm drawing, this is how I like to draw, with a Bistre type color, or an Umber, or a burnt sienna. Burnt sienna is my favorite. And, I just come through and I start doing what we call brush sketching. And I love that because I can change that later on very easy through the painting. And you paint without texture, right? So you paint without texture because you don't want, because if you make an error in the drawing, you can go back and fix it, right? Really easy. So we're going to have some dark right up through here. Right up, he's going to have a light band up through there, but we'll just set some of that in. But you can see how important those dark values are here in capturing that look of him. I'm going to darken right down through here, which might be a little too dark, but I'm going to bring his face forward. Sometimes I will start to adjust it, some of the colors that I might see. It's not quite too dark for him up there, but just a bit. What I think needs to bring out the animal a little bit too much, build him up a little more without losing his character, what he looks like. So we'll put a bit of that right in there. But it starts to give you a good idea. And then as I go back here, sometimes when I'm going to the back of the painting, I will go step up even my brush a little bit bigger. Let's go to a 3/4 inch. So I don't make, because each mark that you make is interest. So, and so I don't want to make a whole bunch of smaller little marks out here, because these areas and the way in which he's sitting and stuff, and he's going to have all of this dark and a band that's going to come right down through here, here. This whole area out here will be slightly darker here. And I just need to, I just need a quick indication of it. I don't need anything perfect right now. After we do the face and we have everything in perfect, then we can come back and work the rest of them. But we don't want to do any of that right now, because we don't want this controlling the painting. We want that to control the painting, right? Yeah, maybe a little thin color right here. So if I was doing a more advanced Bistre, I would come in and start some value painting with it, maybe darkening some areas down right up here on to his forehead at the top of his skull right up here. I might darken some of that down. So this is, if I'm doing something advanced, I come with the big brush and I start setting the light and darker planes that you see into the painting. So I don't really need to do that. Now, so you can see when you look at the big dog here, let me bring in the other one that I had, which I set down. Okay, where did I put that? Other color, oh, fell on the ground. That's why. Sorry about that. Get my act together here. Okay. Give me a break. I've been ill. Okay. So let's so now if you look at that, you can see, yeah, okay, I've taken towards a step. And you can see that that's a little, it's easier to see him in that version than it is here to pick out those important lines. You know, so I've picked out the important lines that I have, started to capture him. But if you're going straight to the color, until you start doing this a lot, it gets a little bit harder. Does that make sense? So you break it down into some simplistic terms. So, you know, is it absolutely perfect? No. I mean, if I was, you know, being absolutely perfect, I'd start smalling down my vision of this. Like, this line here is a little bit too straight. That shadow needs to round up over just a little bit right there, which starts the rounding of the nose. This one that's right here needs to curve back down a little bit right here, which starts the rounding of that inner nostril right there. So those are some of the refinement lines that, you know, once I get the big areas in, my eye narrows down and starts to look at littler things. Is that line need a little bit more roundness to it or not? You know, all of it can be done later on. But the thing is, the reason why I like to take a little extra time right now and do it is because this helps you see the animal, see the character. That's, you know, we're not, you know, it's like Sanden says in that Retrospective, and I hope all of you go watch it, because it's fantastic. He says that it's easy to capture an image. We can all copy an image, just copy it and make an image. But to get the character is the hardest thing. And so that's what we have to work on, right? So I'm going to put that up. That should be dry now. Yes. And so now we can look at him. And let's go over just a bit right here, like that. And then we'll come in and work on him. How much have we got? So I've spoken at you for an hour. Sorry it's a little longer, and no, I just don't jump into it. I want you guys to learn, okay? This is what I do. And it's only an hour, and you're right here, right? So yeah, it's really a great way to do it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start blocking in some of the other tones here that I see, the undertones. And this is where I go to start to find the colors. And that's part of the process too, learning to find the colors that you're going to use. So I use some old scrap paper and stuff here. Now, and I'll use this to help me find some of those tones. And I'll be looking for inner and, you know, undertones basically within the animal here. So I see his character. I don't want to use anything as dark as that so I don't lose his character. But I want to put in some of these tones. And so I'll look for something close, like right in here. I like to do the darker areas first. And I try to find what that color is going to be in that area. And I know I'm going to base it off of the burnt sienna, but I know it has a little bit of the violet in it, and I love the greens. I love to, I mean, he has, you know, when you start to learn these shepherds in there like that, they have really a lot of yellow greens into them. And so I'm going to take a little violet, a little green, and some burnt umber here. And then it is very much softened out. And you can add white, but we do have a beautiful shortcut color here of medium beige here. And so I'll put this on. Now, you don't have, in this first go around of the colors, you don't have to be absolutely perfect, because the next go around and the third go around, I'm going to change the mix slightly. And that's what's going to give all the different interests and stuff like that to that particular area. So, and it's going to dry a little bit darker, but that is really close. I will probably add a little more burnt sienna to that. Excuse me, medium beige to that. So I have green, I have some violet, I have some burnt umber here, and then I lighten it up. And these are all these versions that are here, sometimes a little more green, sometimes a little more violet. All of that will work. We'll lighten it up with a little medium beige. This is an undertone. And that, let's just check that one out again. Let's just make it just a touch lighter, because acrylics dry a bit darker. And so we'll just make it a touch lighter. And yeah, I'm right in there, close enough, I think, to what I need to be in there. It could have a touch more violet here, a little more violet. And I use the red violet because it's a little darker shadowy color than the quinacridone, and it works a little bit better. So, and let's just take this and we'll follow. This is a number 8 fusion flat, and I'll follow some of the idea of where that shadow is going. And I'm going to take my finger and I'm just going to push it off so I don't create edges here. And so I'll start the main blocking in. Now this is really, really important. So when you come back up here towards the top up here into the stop, okay, the angle at which you do here, the angle here is very important. So this angle is going to go up through here, go to there. But this is the plane that's going to come down. This one right here, our brush marks need to come and round his face here just a bit. And I'll blur that off a bit. I'll look for that high and low there like that. There, I love to use my fingers like this. Let's just, for simplicity right now, let's put a little bit of that tone right up in here. Right? We'll put a bit of that right up in there. There. Okay. And so we've got that. And so you can get this also just by using it thinner, just like you do in the Bistre. So let's put a bit of this. This is getting down the side plane of his nose here. And we're going to bring the nostril a little more grayed colored into here. But we'll put a bit of this following up this angle, which builds his nose. Okay? And then we'll come down, even though this is going to go darker, we'll come right down into here where I made that little mistake with that few right here. We'll pull this down slightly here. But eventually I'm going to paint this all in heavy paint, but I don't want to lose his character right now. I feel like I've captured some of him. I need to refine it a bit, but I feel like I captured him okay. So I'm looking for some of these areas here, and we'll push some of that right into here. It's going to get lighter right into there again, so I'll let that happen here. Always pulling the paint in the direction that's going to go. Sometimes, because I don't have to keep reaching, I'll put some drops of water right here. And one of the things, you know, for years I was, as a matter of fact, it's what I got my master's in, was basically what's called stroke control, the old painting style scrolls, acantha scrolls and everything. And when you're painting those, you have to stay super loose with it. Your hands always have got to move super loose. And, you know, my mentor, who I painted with for 17 years, who taught me so much, always said, bring everything right around you. Get it as close to it. Don't reach. Every time you reach, you tense up your shoulders. Tension up your shoulders makes it stiff to hard to find something. So bring it around to where you can work and work on things very comfortably, and your marks will start to stay more casual. Don't reach. So step back on your brush and just start bringing in that mark at that angle and stuff that you want to do. And this is going to go right up to his eye here. Okay. We'll bring that right up in there. A little bit more red violet, a little bit of green. Change the color, the character of the tone a bit. We'll come back and put some more in. We'll change it a bit. We don't want to get too much marks, especially on this side, because this is the side of him we want to recede. So we've got to be a little careful. We want that mark to come down. This is a heavier mark here. And it's pretty much going to go right up into the entire socket here. So we'll bring this up. Let's just bring this a little heavier right in there. Right up on that side. That'll bring his nose forward. Right in there. Right? And you can see that heavier color line right over here that's making the width of the pushing out of that socket there. So we'll pull some of that out here. Let's widen this just a bit, a little more color. Pull this down just a bit here. We'll be putting lights in and changing some of that. That's pulled that too straight, darn it. But that's okay. I'm a professional. I can fix it. We'll push a little heavier right in there. A little light, just almost like a grisaille or a sepia type painting, the Bistre is very much like that. We'll put in a little light here. But I'm going to want to blur that whole edge there. That's going to be very, very important to blur that edge. And we'll put beautiful marks in here into his fur and stuff. We'll get all of that stuff. But that gets a beautiful tone. I am going to do something a little different too. Normally what I do is I work the entire painting all at the same time. But I'm going to focus in on painting some of his head. And there's a lot of artists that do that. But I want to kind of keep this blown up for you as much as possible. So we'll set a lot of the tone and stuff here onto his head, and then we'll move through some of his body after we get a good idea of some of the colors that we're going to use in this area and stuff on him. Okay, so we'll set that in. We'll leave that there a little lighter, go to a little more burnt sienna. Up here at the top, it's a little more, it's not quite as violet, maybe a little more burnt sienna, maybe a little raw sienna and green into the burnt umber here. I said burnt sienna, I meant burnt umber. And let's thin that a little bit of water. So this first into the blocking in, all I need is some water here to set some future of these tones. And then we'll get into, I'll show you all kinds of ways to paint the acrylics wet into wet so you have lots of working time here. We'll get that. But we don't need it right now. Put in some more water. Let's use this right up in through here. Try to soften this out though. These are big strokes. They can take away from him really easy and we don't need them to. So work the color here a little bit. Maybe blur it with your fingers a bit, so that you don't have too much movement in that yet, in that ear. We're just going to push that ear back in there a bit, okay? You don't want too much out in here. We're not going to want too much brush movement because they're big. The shepherd's ears are huge. Piter's ears are enormous. And that's the dog out, my son's dog out at the farm. And so I was just like always, wow, buddy, you got huge ears. So we'll leave some of that light that's going to go right in there. A few little light marks. Doesn't need to be because we can put the light back in. But we'll just push them back a bit so we have a nice feel for the portrait here, for how we're going to do on him. Let's put a little bit of more shadow. This is a cast shadow on the tongue. We'll put a different color in there just a bit, but it's cast shadow in there. Just finding some of those nice shadow areas. This line's a little harsh, so we can take that out a bit there. So that's a good undertone, right? That's there. And really, you have a lighter tone in him already, but we could develop that a little bit more. I need to get a little bit heavier, like right up above the eye. So these light colors right in here don't belong there. And it's a thicker pull down on this side and then across this way, which is making the upper eye. Okay, so let's get those in. Let's get this, and this could be let's go a little more burnt umber, maybe even a tiny bit of that blue. Let's put a little bit more dark right in there. More so than what I thought I had. Bit of that right in there. There we go. That's getting him right there. But it's right in here. These are the important areas. So now I'm going to widen out, thin out my color, but widen out some of these marks. Not lose that real super dark, but widen out some of these shadows a bit. So I'm creating more socket there. Does that make sense? More shadow into the socket. Just a slow widening of it. Slow. Do it slow. Sit back and watch it. And you know, that's a beautiful thing. Sanden does several videos, and I have them all, and I've watched all of them. I used to just put them on and just when I painted portraits, just listening to his brilliant procedure of creating this stuff, and just listening to it. And the way in which he presented the teaching of it was just magnificent. And he would be very, very deliberate with every stroke. You just don't put it on there, especially after you've developed some of the character of the dog. The last thing that you want to do is come in there and quickly do something. Everything now starts to be very, very deliberate. So, you know, I'm going to take a little bit more. Let's look into that burnt umber, maybe a little bit of the red, violet, and green here. Let's start out a bit thin, so just a touch of water. We're going to come right down into here and be a little bit more deliberate about some of these shadow lines pulling down here. Here, and squaring up this part of his face a bit. Now, we'll bring some of that back with the light, but for the light to show up, I've got to get some of this dark in there as well. Right in there like that. So I'm going to get, and you can see it up in here in his muzzle, it's quite dark. And so we've got to bring that back in here. And I start with this, you know, he uses a technique called Premier Coup, which is very, very similar to Alla Prima, and Sanden does. And but it builds from the shadows to the lights. So you go shadows like this, and like you've seen me do with Buster and some of the others, which I use modified Premier Coup type of technique. I build the shadows, and then I go up a half tone, and then up a half tone. And so what would be a half tone? Well, if I identify this as his lightest tone, and identify this as his darkest tone, right in here would actually technically be a half tone. It's halfway on the value scale, which that's something that you'll see me pull out here, very important. Especially as I'm refining the values, I'll use my value scales consistently, and I'll bring it out for you guys too. I just have it over on my desk in the other room. I forgot to bring it here, but that's very important, I think, for this. So we'll push some of that right in there, make sure we capture that character on him, right? And I think maybe a touch more. It actually goes just a tiny bit more blue. So I will start to pick out some slight differences on it, especially in his nose here. It's going to go more bluish because it's more of a reflection of the shine here. That's too dark. But let me put a little beige into that. And so I sometimes I'll leave that and push the beige and stuff. See, I love to do. We're going to do this. We're going to build paint. So we're going to be painting right on top of these shadows that we're putting on, while we don't lose the character of our guy that we just set up. Does that make sense? So we want to start getting that and refining this, right? And so a little bit more of that beige stuff right in here, soften this mark down just a bit. So I'll look to that. Now, so if this is our light tone that we have in here, what I'll start to do is look for a shadow tone. Maybe I'll put just a couple tones of a couple marks of some of this down where we see, like right down under, it's going to be right down under here, a little bit of that. That's too dark, so we'll lighten that back up here. And let's just take some of that off. See, I don't take it all off. It's all good. You know, it's all good. You don't have to take it off. It's all good, different variation in the tone color. See, it's just has a little bit of the blue cast to it. Then it goes just a little bit warmer reddish cast. Might even go up to just a touch of the burnt sienna. We'll add all this because burnt sienna is coming into this guy. You know, it will be in here. And the burnt siennas and the raw siennas, we're going to get them in there. You know, that's where we're going to get those. See, and that's that burnt sienna. Boy, that just hits him right there. And it's like this color right here. I know that color very well. That's raw sienna, a little bit of burnt sienna in here. And so you want to start painting that color in there. That's just a beautiful color. So we'll have that. Matter of fact, this would be almost like a halftone here. And we could paint a little bit of that. Now see, as I go over some of the shadows, you won't see it quite so much, but we will as we get more opaque. We want to build. We're going to do a building process, a layering process, a building process here. And as we build, we're going to get more opaque, okay, so, and heavier. And all the time, we don't build so much that we don't lose the dog. Does that make sense? We don't lose his character that we spent some time putting in. But maybe this burnt sienna and a little bit of the raw sienna or a little yellow oxide into it too here. You'll see some light areas. This is kind of almost like a good medium halftone right in here. It's halfway between the light and the shadow. So we could actually just drop some of this in here into some of these areas here. Especially you're going to see it like right in here as it's coming out of a shadow. You'll see it right in there, right up in here on his upper eyelid, right up through here. You'll see some of that. He'll have some other tone in there, which we got to get in there, which we will. So, you know, you could put some of that, then you could drop into a little bit of that. I usually don't do this on the blocking end, but you could, you know, drop in a little bit of the burnt umber there. I mean, it just gives a nice variety to it. So let's just pull this down. So this is our halftone here, and some burnt sienna. Sometimes a little green into that, like I hit that green by mistake, but it's not bad because green goes into that. You know, these colors all work well. I'll just add some water to it. Maybe a touch more yellow over here if we come over to that light side. Add some water. This is the blocking in. Again, no texture. This is just blocking in, no texture. A little bit of the warmth that comes in on that side of him there. And it's just a touch too yellow for that. That has a little bit more of a beautiful tone, which is a more tan color. So you could actually pick up this color. When I don't have that on the palette, I use burnt sienna and green. And you add that to that, maybe a touch of white into that right there. And you get this softer yellow. It's not as intense a yellow here. Yeah, that's the color that's on him right here. That's it right there. It's not quite as bright there, and that'll fit that color right in there. But there's a little bit of light, and I'll show you. Sometimes you can preserve that. We'll just take some light here, maybe a little bit of we'll jump ahead one step. Sometimes I'll do this if I destroyed or I carried that a little too heavy, so I got rid of my light right here. And I want to preserve that, which is helping preserve his character. So I'll just drop some of that in there right now and bring some of that back out there just a bit. I hit it too much. Be more deliberate. Be very deliberate with what you do because once you set the look, you start being more deliberate with what you do. Be a little careful, Dave. Right? So we'll take some of this light, some of this right up here. We'll move this up following some of his stroke direction. So it's rounding this way, and now it's pulling down here. So we'll push some of that in there, that nice warmth on him, right? But there's a lot of other subtle tones in there. Do you see them? Now as you put this in and start doing that, you'll start seeing all of these other subtle tones. It's going to go a little more yellow, maybe even a touch of the Diarylide Yellow as we come down in through here a bit. some of this. I love to just brush these tones lightly, and we're going to do it several layers so we get lots of variation to the tones. You know, you saw me do this on some of the other dogs. I love to layer paint the tones here. And I'll be watching each time as I put this on. So this is called a half tone coming in. It's not the lightest tone, okay? It's not the lightest tone. As a matter of fact, I'm painting out some of the light, but it is the half tone. It's between the light and the shadow here. And we'll look for other smaller tones and marks. Here, a little bit of raw sienna and burnt sienna. Some of those other little tones. Look into some of those areas where you might see that. Pull that in. Right up here by his stop. You know, you might find some of that, and you'll find that burnt sienna and green, which is a beautiful, I use this on elk and everything. Maybe a touch of the violets. Maybe you could put both violets in there and a little bit of green here. And it's just a touch dark, so maybe even a little medium beige. You could use white. Medium beige will do this. See how soft it stays? Yeah, that stays very soft. Let's use that right down in here. Let's see. Yeah, let's see where we are. Check your colors. Let's just put some of this right here. I'm probably a little bit dark, just a touch. I could be just a touch lighter. But you know, the next time I come through, so I know I'm using those burnt siennas, greens. That's a beautiful tan color. Sliding it over to the violets just a little bit because I see the violet in there. But the next time I make it, I won't make it exactly the same. And that's where you get these subtle. If you just keep making the same color, or you mix a pile of that color, and which I've done for years, but you know, but you mix a pile of that color, and then you just come back and paint it in there again, you know, you're just repeating it. Does that make sense? You want to get these subtle tone variations. That's much better. It's much lighter in there. Okay, that's a better tone in there. It's fitting some of that area. As a matter of fact, I see some of that coming right down out of the eye here. I see some of that. We hit some of that area there. That's pretty. Right up into the mid-tone areas here, right? Right down in there. Some of this into the width of the side plane here. We're going to want to work on that several times. I'm going to work on that several times. And we'll pull some of that down. Goes down in here. Right down in there. And we'll come right, push this up, almost right up here to his lower lid. You know, this is really kind of a darker area in him. Get rid of that light spot. We're going to want to inject some light back in there, but, you know, it's not too much right now. So now that I put that on there, though, this color doesn't look quite as dark. So I'm going to put down that larger one here for a second, and I'm going to go back to maybe my burnt umber, a little bit of this darker blues and stuff here, and maybe widen this out a bit more. So as you put on, you know, you get that, as you're working this, the simultaneous contrast starts to hit you. So if I put on a medium halftone, that halftone will make some of the other tones, like the darker tone, not look so dark. So a dark tone looks really dark against a light tone, but it starts to lighten up when you put it against a medium tone. So I'm going to redarken so I keep that nice dark look into his socket here. Express this out a little further, maybe slightly different. But I've kept still keeping the main character marks of his eye and stuff here, and I can see that little tiny line there, here, and that comes in, and that tear duct here. Tear duct of his eye, it's very important. The tract that comes out a bit there. Okay. And the camera doesn't pick it up real well, but I have a couple of little light spots in there I need to get rid of. So I'll just take just a medium tone and get rid of that just a bit. But that whiter, slightly whiter right up here on his eye needs to come back in here, and we'll fuzz that out a bit so it's not quite so straight, Dave. There we go. That keeps that nice dark there. So you'll see I'll come back, and I'll come back several times, revisiting all of these lines several times, because you're going to have to. Because as you put on more tones, everything changes again. So you're going to have to. Let's put a softer, some of this other, softer, even some of this in it. A little bit of half tone, slightly soften that upper lid. It's too dark. Let's go a little more medium beige, maybe a touch of this light. A little more medium beige. Right up above that. There. That's good. Now, usually like on these, now you see like on his eyes, and this is why I like it in the monitor. Let's go ahead and put his eyes in, block them in this part of it. I like the eyes to glow a little more than what they normally do. And so I'm going to start this out, and you're going to think I've lost it. I'm going to use some, this is how I like to do it. I like to make them glow really big, and then I start to reduce down that glow with layers of paint. So I'm going to put in some Diarylide Yellow first. This one reason why I love it. Yes, it's going to make him look a little demonic here for a little bit. Here. But so I'll put that in. And then I'm going to look to that beautiful Sienna, raw Sienna. And I'm going to thin this just a touch of water. And when I want a lot of interest to it, to the eye, I don't wash it over it. I slowly just tap it in, reducing down some of that glow. And it may take a couple times to just tap that in and reduce down some of that. And then we got that burnt sienna in there with that. So a little burnt sienna. Now, if you make a mistake, take too much of it, you can take some water and take it back out, right? But I'm going to leave them probably a little more glowy right now, because I'll paint them back in as I get more stuff. Here, a little bit of the burnt sienna in there, okay? And then they have a lot of shadows to the eyes and stuff. So first I'm going to take some of this burnt umber and blue, that real dark, a little bit of the red violet here. And I'm going to restate that pupil softly in there, like that. And I usually, so I brought the pupil up just a bit more contrast than what he has. And sometimes I will do that if I feel I can get away with it, soften the edges of it here. If I feel I can get away with it for right now, because that, you know, that it's character that I can always soften out. But, you know, one of the things is the softness of his eyes is giving this loving look to him. So I got to be kind of careful that I don't take away that. Now, let's take some of that dark. Let's thin it way out. Burnt umber and some of those blues and stuff. Thin it way out here with some water. Sometimes I'll do this later. I'm going to do part of it right now. And this is to put the upper lid shadow onto the eye. And so I'll probably work these eyes again, but, and that's a little wet, hard to do when it's really wet. But I'll put just a touch of it in here right now, that lid shadow. And that sets you see the shine from the lower part of the eye, and you have the upper lid shadow. So I may have to do that, especially on this one. That one came out really nice. This one might need another little mark. Tap it in there a bit more. There, like that. He doesn't really have a catch light on there, and so I might not put that in, and then again we might. But I can always come back in and and this is what I like to do, tap some of those colors back in, which gives interest to the eye. So I might do this a couple times, some of these colors, softening some of the marks, add some of that in there, some of the softer marks, other marks in there. But I'll work those eyes, and I'll show you a couple of different ways that we're going to do that. But let's take some of the burnt sienna, some of the burnt umbers, and that burnt sienna color right in here. While we have this small brush, we'll soften this tone with another little, this is called, so when you're making a softer tone, a tone, so we put in the dark tone, we put in the half tone. So we come half tone lighter, or half tone dark tone. And when you're putting in the tone between the half tone and the dark tone, you're coming in. So I'm getting a little sienna, a little burnt sienna, a little bit of the burnt umber, maybe a little yellow. So I'm taking that burnt umber slightly lighter. When you're doing that, that's called a transitional tone. It sits between the half tone and the other shadow tone or the light tone. So I can have a transitional light tone, transitional dark tone. So I'll take some of this, not as dark as what it was, not as light it was as it is over here. It's right in between, and I'll use transitional tones, small marks of these, right in between my darks and those other tones to create more softness to the face. So right in through here, I have that other half tone, half tone right in here lighter. So I'm going to come in with a slight, not as dark as we use there with some of these others. These are called transitional tones that are used to create more like fur interest and other kind of interest. You can start adding some of the transitional tones now. It's a little early, but since I'm painting on the face, and I can do that. And so a good place to be like right up in here where that dark's meeting this light right here. I just transition that up, and it makes a softer transition of the tone, if that makes sense. So, but we got a ways to go here. So I'll do that. And this is all still very transparent, but this is making my map. Does that make sense? Then I know where to go. And then I'll start painting some of these more opaque and with texture. I'll start putting some of the textures and stuff in there. We'll do that. Now, we can also start maybe a little bit of the lighter tone. So this is still a blocking in. I'm finding my color. So I want to find this color. So I'm going to take a little raw sienna, a little yellow oxide, and some white, maybe a bit of the medium beige too, to keep that from getting too bright. That's a beautiful color right there. And it might be a nice base. Let's see where that fits on him. Let's see. So it's not too bad. It's maybe a touch. Well, no, it's not too bad. Maybe you can go a touch lighter because it's going to dry a little bit darker. So let's take some of that and let's just push some of that tone right in here. Follow the direction. It's very important. The light tones can paint out really fast because opaque, your whites are very opaque. The titanium white we have in this line is very opaque. But I'm just going to color block in some of this right now. This isn't the blending. This isn't creating the fur. This isn't creating great things. This is just color blocking that in right now. And we'll do more of it later. Let's reduce this dark line right up here. Push some of that in there. Push some of that coming down this way. So this sets the map, the color map, see? And I get all my tones correct. So when I come in here and I put in another tone, I know I'm, whether or not I'm close. That's the ticket to it. So we'll widen that part of his forehead out here a bit. And you can see other things like maybe a little bit of the transitional half tone right in there. A little bit of that burnt sienna and yellows and stuff in there. A bit of that in there, right? We'll see some of that. But we're starting to capture him and stuff already. But I already see like some mistakes when I look up because now my eye starts to focus in a little bit. And So like right in here, when I pushed that shadow the second time, I got it a little bit more straight than what it is right there on him. And so I want to, and I see it right now, so I'm going to correct it. I see what I need to do. I need to lift this shadow up a little higher. That arch on the eye is so important, that little line there. And I know it's a little line, but it's so very important because it sets the excitement of the animal, whether he's sleepy or not. So I want to make sure I capture that line correctly. And I'm going to take a bit of that burnt sienna yellow here, just more shadow color of the eye, and round that up just a bit up there. I might have to put that shadow in the eye back in again, but I can do that. A little bit of the shadow. That's better. That's closer to it. Yeah, it's going to be very important. And I've got this eye a little bit too oval. I see that. But, you know, when you first put it on, you think, yeah, that looks okay. But, you know, then as you get more stuff going, you start to see more things. Does that make sense? And that's why I always give myself time to go back and revisit that again. That's better on him. Brings his character back in there just a bit more. But I can still use some of those light streaks, like there's that beautiful sienna, burnt sienna, raw sienna, and maybe just a touch of the burnt umber in there. Kind of tone coming right down in here. That'll get, when we really get refined on our tones, our half tones, transitional tones, that'll be very, very important. But we'll get there. But so I see it. Sometimes when I see it, I just go ahead and take care of it because I'll forget about it. So let's go back to this light tone. See, it's still wet there from, and again, I'm thinning it out a little water. So these tones are just creating a color map for me. So we'll come right in here to his stop, and it's got to lift up slightly. The angle is going to change as it starts to lift up here. That's what's going to create that nice transitional area. So, you know, painting the stop here is one of the most important parts. And the width across here sets the width of his nose. And, you know, you don't, and I know he looks very pointed nose, but he does have a pretty good width here. So we want to make sure that we capture that. And so right in here and right between this half tone and this light tone, I would make a transitional. So this is my light tone and my half tone down here. I would make a transitional tone, a little green, a little sienna, a little bit of the burnt sienna. These transitional tones don't have to be exactly perfect, but you can just get them close. I'm going to soften that with a little bit of my medium beige. That'll work. And I want to come right between those two, so maybe just a touch of light. So I want to come really right in between here and here, right in here. And I'm just going to soften this right now with that transitional tone right in there. That helps soften that exchange right there. And that's where I will, towards the end, I'll leave that very much as a brush mark. So I'll see that. I'll be looking for those things. But here's more of a half tone, maybe a touch of burnt umber in it. Right up here, we'll just push that in there, right there for right now. Some of that right in here. As you're working around. So you see some of this coming in. Now you can see we can get more light on his face and stuff. We'll do that. We'll get more blocking in. I'll look for other little things. Let's just go ahead and put a real soft pink, medium beige, a little bit of the red in there. A real soft pink, maybe a touch of white, maybe a touch of the quinacridone. Just a touch. Get it kind of light. Here, I think that will, because we'll put a light strike on it, but let's just, yeah, that's pretty good. Put a bit of that in there right now. So we'll get close, just close here, right? You'll have that light. We'll go halftone, transitional halftone, darker here, right in this area a bit more. Some more tone, filling up some of that area. More, we'll do more. Like, you know, one of the things like this transitional halftone would be good right up in here. I've lost some of this width of this upper eyebrow here and socket. So I'll push that right in there and get that closer to him. Doesn't have to be perfect yet, because all this gets done again, guys. This first basically hour and a half, hour 40 minutes of the video is to teach you, you know, how I do it and stuff, and then blocking in, the main blocking in of it. And then we're going to really start the painting with the textures, painting some wet and wet, and all that will come with that. But this sets my color map, the look of the dog, see? And then all I have to do, so what I do is I concentrate on here, finding those tones and the colors. Now I know that color in that area. I'll come back and make it a little different, but then I'll be concentrating on making fur and movement and stuff like that, because I've already answered the color questions with this particular step. Does that make sense? So the first step, I answer the important lines of the face and kind of find his character, find him. And then the next step is find the basic colors. They don't be perfect, but get as close as you can. Then the next step, we start the movement of the fur and the decoration, basically the decoration of them. Does that make sense? That's how we're going to approach it. He has, and I just now picked it up, a little bit of yellow here, the side of his face coming down here, showing through right there. I don't want to lose that. Let's put a bit of that sienna in that as well. So it's going to come right in there. I just saw that right down in there. That's interesting. So, but we'll paint all that. We'll see all that. Let's block in his nose. His nose, burnt umber and blue. That makes a really nice nose. The blue helps gray it up a bit, right? Which is what we want. A little more burnt umber. Sometimes I add a little burnt sienna or so to warm it a bit, but you get this beautiful gray. And we don't want to go that light. That's a nice light for the top up there. We want to go a little warmer down here. Let's try this gray right in here. Then we'll add some light to that. It's a little dark. So let's go a little bit lighter here. And we'll do this nose again, like everything, several times. Just brush this over lightly. Let those values, those colors, kind of mix in together a bit right in there. Okay, it's very important that you, of course, he's going to round here. And so we need a bit more of our shadow, some burnt sienna, some raw sienna, a little bit of the blue right here. Some of that shadow tone coming down right here. That helps that round. It gives that form shadow to him. But we want this to fade into that nose and then fit that flat plane up there at the top. I'm going to go to a small brush here. And I'm just going to scumble or just lightly work in. This is not going to be perfect yet, but lightly work in some of the light tone so I see where it's going to go right up here. Some of the shine and the light tone. I'm going to do this again. This is not perfect. This is just setting where that light is. And, you know, this is even with the Premier Coup technique that Sanden uses and stuff. You set it in like this. You work the tones and half tones, transitional tones, set the lights. You come back and work it again. And we'll work small, like I'll add just a little bit of the burnt sienna to this and change that tone ever so slightly here. Tap that around a bit there. Now that nose in that front's a little dark. I know it's a little dark, but boy, it's got a lot of character. Does that make sense? So I'll use that, and then I'll push some of that shadow back down lightly. This is what I'll do towards the end of the painting, moving small marks of tone around. That is going to really set it. Does that make sense? And so right now, yeah, he's got some, some areas that really need refinement, but it's got some great movement to it, and I like it for where it is right now. So I know I'm going to fix it, but I like it for where it is right now, and that's the important part. So we got that. Let's take just a thin little wash of the color and get rid of that huge light right there. Just wash through it a bit. And that'll push some of that back. So we capture. So here, in the first 1 hour, 45 minutes, I've got 7 minutes. So I have the 3 monitors right here. I can see what you're looking at. I can talk to you, and I'm watching the camera and how much, you film on these little things, how much time I got left. 7 minutes before this one goes, you're out. So we're going to have to change up. I'll make another video. I might, if you enjoy this, I'll put this one up, and in the next day or two, we'll get the others up and stuff. I'm going to continue probably working on it. But, if you like this type of format where I slow it down like this and work with this and work with you and get this on, especially now as we're going to go in and paint the dog, please leave some comments down there. Like the video and leave some comments. I know I'm going to get blasted by people for, they'll put don't like the video because I talk too much. But I'm a teacher, guys, and I like to teach with it. And I like reading your comments. And, we try to do as much of the stuff possible, for free here on the channel, because this is our giving back to you guys. But, help support us by giving a like, help us share the videos, say, hey, go watch this guy. He's kind of neat, something like that. Leave some nice comments in there, because that helps the video, promotes the video and stuff. And, sometimes watch a commercial, because we don't make hardly anything on the commercials. YouTube makes most of it, but, it does, all of that supports the channel. Your subscriptions to the channel and these things is the only thing that supports this channel and stuff. So, it takes a lot of time to put these things out here, but we love doing it for you. Okay. So if you do that, click that like, click that subscribe, leave a comment that you like this. If you don't like this kind of filming format, don't say anything. Okay. I don't want to read it. Okay. Just, that doesn't work. I think before I leave, I'll put a little bit of shadow right here. I've got just a couple minutes, so we'll put just a little bit of shadow as that tongue is going up into that. Here's about there, some burnt sienna, a touch of the violet, some burnt, and some burnt umber, burnt sienna, a touch of the violet, and that. We'll push just a little bit of that shadow in there, just so we see that back here. Scumble it just a bit. There. Leave that. That makes that push in there a bit more. And then there we go. I'll see you guys on the next one. We'll continue on working this, and then we got to decide if we're going to paint some of that ocean and all that other kind of stuff behind him, okay? All right? All right. Thanks, guys. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.